Hey there! In this video, I'm going to talk about the images that I made on the first day of shooting at Splintercreek. When I first arrived at Splintercreek, I wandered around the model home and took some scouting images. I'm not going to focus on those in this video because this is about the images that I produced after doing the scouting and deciding which images I was going to make. The image that I decided to start with was this one looking from the dock up to the house. I just really loved this composition where you see the dock leading the eye up into the house the same way that if you had gotten off a boat in the dock and this is how you would be walking to the house. So I set the tripod up here at the very end of the pier as far away as I could get and got it up as high as I could possibly get it, and that's how I got this composition. So what I did was took a couple of images at different settings, like a little darker to lighter, which is something I do in pretty much every shot. It's called bracketing, and so you shoot what the camera thinks is in the middle and then a little bit brighter and a little bit darker, and then infuse those together. If you let the computer do it automatically, that would be HDR, but the problem with HDR images is that the computer doesn't generally do a very good job. It doesn't have the eye that a human does, and it can't do it the perfect way. So I blend my exposures manually. So here is our finished image, and I'm going to open this up in Photoshop and show you how we went from those originals to this finished image. So here we have our image in Photoshop, and so this is the middle exposure layer. This is kind of the most average of the images, and one important part of this image is you can see that the grass was just freshly cut right before I took this photo, and so that's going to have to get fixed, and I'll show you in a little bit how I fix that problem. But the first thing I do is I have a layer here that's a little bit brighter, but it's too bright in some places. You can see it's a little too bright on the building here. The stairs are way too bright, but what I want is to get a little bit of this light from these underhangs so that you can see and it's not all deep in shadow there. And so I use a layer mask and I brush it in very carefully into the right areas to get this nice balance. And you can see the difference that having this image adds. So it's just a nice subtle light in those middle areas of the image. I have another image that's even brighter than that. So this is very, very bright in most of the parts of the image, but it does have some light down here in these details. And so what I do with mask is bring those in. And so you can see those filling in these areas right here so that the house stands out just a little bit more and you get to see a little more detail in it. Next step is getting the grass fixed. Initially, I checked in the archives of grass that I had, and I wanted to kind of see what sort of masks I would need to build here. And so I started with, let me hide some of these first. I started with this kind of like normal lawn grass and built that in, but obviously that's not the right grass for this landscape. And so here's how that looked. And at the time, that was all that I had. And so this was the first version of the image. I wasn't that satisfied. So what I did is went to a reservoir nearby and I got this image. And I took several of them, and conditions were, so it was overcast on this day, but I was able to tweak the image a little bit so you can't tell so much. But what I did is tried to get as close as I could to this grass because I'm super close to the grass in this image. And so here, with a bit of creative masking, we've got this grass, which is a much better setup. And actually that's not the finished one. This is the finished layer. There we go. So that blends a lot more seamlessly, and you can't really tell that that grass isn't really there. And that was an involved operation of doing a very careful mask right around these areas. And after that, I just wanted to add a little bit of color and contrast to the image, and so I did a curves layer to get the blacks and the whites and the white balance correct. And that's how I made that image. I absolutely love this tub. This bathroom is beautiful. I was drawn to it the second that I saw it. There were a lot of things in this house where I was just like, this is amazing, and this is what I have to photograph. I had a couple of different ideas of how I was going to do this. You can tell that I took 70 photos of this room. And I was originally going to go for a brighter look, a more like bright daylight vibe. To do that, I walked around and bounced the flash around the room. I was going to go for this very bright look, but I felt like this room worked best in a very like moody setting. And it was kind of dim outside because it was starting to rain anyway, so I tried to embrace that. And so here's the image, the finished image, and I'm gonna show you how I made that. So here's the starting image of the tub. And from here, I started adding more light to bring out the dark areas of the image. And so the first step was one of these flashed layers to bring out a little bit of color and contrast in the tub. I also lit that candle, which I thought brought some really nice light to it. And so with this layer active, you can see that it brings a lot of the color out in the tub right there. Next up, I added a layer that cut out some of the light on the front part of the image, because it's usually good to have a darker foreground so that your eyes go into the brighter part towards the center of the image. So usually I tend to add a vignette or darken anything that's really bright in the foreground so that it doesn't stop the eye from proceeding into the image. And continue to add layers of brightness to bring up the light in the areas that I wanted. There was this one shot where the sunlight was coming down right here and hitting the tub and making this nice little glow on the wall, and that's what this image is for. So this got the tub pretty much where I wanted it, and from there it was about working on this window, which is too bright and grabs way too much of the attention. First I went with a different shot of the exterior. It was a little bit darker. And then I adjusted the angles here because not everything is perfectly straight, and in architecture photography it is all about getting it perfectly straight. So there we are, everything's straightened out. Next up, I cut back the light on the candle, or the color on the candle a little bit. It's a very bright orange here, but with this adjustment it's calmed down quite a bit. And then we made the window a little bit darker, and because again it was still too bright and still taking too much of the attention of the image. The next step, and this was not fun, the light fixture here, I liked it, but it's too close to not being in the image, then therefore it's just kind of an eyesore. It would either need to be more prominent in the frame and stay, but because there's only so little of it here, it's a distraction that I needed to get rid of. And so here is when I removed the light fixture up there. And this is the second part of smoothing out the ceiling up here, because you can see some of the cloning work here was a little muddy. And then I showed this to some of my architecture photographer friends, and they liked it, but they pointed out that the window's still a little too loud. And so the trick with that was to bring the saturation down just a little bit. So now the level, because the rest of the room has a very like mild saturation to it. It's very soft and inviting, and with the window too colorful, you can't look at anything else. But with it nice and relaxed, it produces a very calm image that you can take your time looking at, and you can imagine being in this room and being relaxed. And so there we are for that image. This hallway, there's one hallway in the house that leads to a window, and this is right outside of the bathroom actually, and I just loved this. Something about this one little plant right in front of this window I just could not get enough of. And so I set up this shot and took some brackets again, as you can see. I took quite a bit more of this, again with the idea that I was going to make a much brighter image. And then, after working on it for a little bit, I decided I wanted to go with something a little more relaxed. And so I ended up not using quite as many of the flash pops as I thought that I would originally. So here we are. This is the starting point for this image, and it's a nice dark mild layer when nothing is blown out. And I started by, after a bit I decided I was going to go with a brighter look, and so I decided to make this the base image instead of that darker one. And from here I started to build a little bit. I have a little pop flash back in this room to just bring the light up just a little bit. It's very subtle, but it helps to bring the eye through the frame a little bit. Here we have a flash a pop of the flash frame. I'll show you what that actually looks like here. So that's me standing there and blasting some light into the ceiling, and that light falls down onto these chairs and some of the foreground here. It's very subtle, and I just have a little bit of light added there. Next up, I decided to bring up the light in most of the room, and so this is another brighter layer that I added on top. And then I decided to clean up the colors a little bit, and so you'll see that the whites become a little bit whiter, and the areas that are muddy become a little less so. And then next up is bring the whites up to a true white and giving it this look. And so this is where I ended with the image here, and then I was looking at it later, and I decided I wanted to go with a tighter crop that focused more on the hallway and looking towards the plant, and that's how I arrived at this finished image. It started to rain after that, but I felt like the house really worked well in the rain. You know, it's a house that's designed to fit in among the elements, and so I didn't want to produce all like super bright sunlighty shots. If it's raining, then I'll take a shot that's dictated by that. And so I really liked the view out of this window when it was raining, because you get a lot of these really beautiful greens. Those rocks look really nice, and so do the trees. And it's nice seeing the porch there with all of the water making the reflections on it. So I moved the furniture out of the way because with the, let's see, I'm pretty sure I have a shot in here where the couches are in the way. Here we go. So with this setup, your eye can't travel through the image. Like as your eye comes into the image, it stops right at the couch, and then doesn't really go beyond quite as well as it could. And so rearrange the furniture to have this table lead the eye in at an angle towards it, so that the lines all lead you through to the center of the image. This line, this line, this line, this line, they all go to the middle. And that's the idea, so that your eye goes straight there. So I started backwards when I was building this image. The last thing that we did in this room was flag off the window behind the camera so that we could get rid of this glare right here. And I had some black cinema cloth, but I didn't have a very large piece of it. And so we had to take several shots in order to get rid of all of the glare. And so you can see me cut out a little bit right here, and then cut out a little more. And then that process continues until we get to a point where you get a very clean view through the window. Next step is adding a bit of light to the interior. So here we have a very gentle bit of light being added to the area by the fireplace and the table, or ottoman. A little bit more gentle fill with the flash. Here I added some light in the kitchen coming from the direction of the window and the door here. Next up, added a little bit of light up here in the wall. And here another gentle little bit of flash to bring up the light levels. And the image continued like this, with me adding little bits of light to bring the image up to the brightness that I wanted it to have. I thought about having this image with the lights on, but I kind of liked how clean the image looked without them. Next up is a curves layer that, as you can see, made the image a little more poppy and brought up the light a little more. And then I continued that to bring the light up even higher to give you this look that's kind of like a bright but rainy day. You can see that I have these little guides on the image, and I used those to get everything straight so that the building didn't look like it was built poorly, you know, because that's very important. So something that I noticed, it was this little, first I noticed the chair, and I was like, well, I need to Photoshop that chair out. And then I was looking at this reflection down here and this thing, and I was really baffled at how it stopped right here. And I was like, wait, does it just fade out of existence right there? Did I like clone that out and not like finish it? But then I realized that there were just some plants here that made it look a little confusing. And so the last thing that I did was take out this little utility pole, the chair, and the reflection of that utility thing. And that's where we have this finished image. And I decided to give it a little bit of crop, so to take out some of this dead space at the top and a little bit of dead space at the bottom. And that's how we got to the finished image of looking through the window towards the rocks in the rain. Next up is my favorite shot from the first day, and so it started to rain really hard towards the evening, and so I thought I might not be able to get a twilight shot that day. But it finally started to let up a little bit. It definitely didn't stop raining, so it was still raining, but I decided I was going to go for it anyway. So I ran out along the little coastline here and through the woods, and then out to this little peninsula that was jutting out almost completely in front of the house. And I set up my tripod there, and I took several images, as you see here, and I will show you how I combined those to create the finished twilight shot. So here I have it in Photoshop, and you can see I've got my layers of different images here. Again, I needed to fix the grass here, so I started with that by adding another image that I took from the reservoir. And here you can see that original image and the little mask that I used to get it in the image and right around the boat here, and sort of blend it in with the rest of the landscape here. Obviously it's the wrong color, and that's not going to work. So first I started by making it darker to match the rest of the image, and then moved on to get the color similar to the rest of the grass and the rest of the image. And so after that, I worked on improving the image a bit. So I wanted a little bit more contrast there, so I added a layer for contrast. And then I noticed that it was getting a little too dark, and that's not what I wanted. I want the house to really jump out. And so I grabbed an earlier frame, and in which the house was bright during an earlier part of the day, and added that over the top. But in that earlier image, you couldn't see very well into this darker, into the little porch area, and so I blended the two images together so that you get the light in the porch and you get a little bit of the glow from this light hitting these areas of the porch over here. And the next step was to add a little bit more brightness there to really make the house jump out. After that, I started working on the color. So here it's a little too like Hollywood movie. These oranges are super orange, and the blues are like really blue. And so it's very like jarring and intense. It's too like real estate photo. This is an architecture shoot, and so we want these images to look very soft and inviting and really just show off the house as this beautiful, relaxing place. And so the next bit of adjustments were to really tone it down and relax how intense the light levels are here. I added a bit of a color cast here to make it look like more of a nice sunset, because it wasn't a nice sunset. It was a very rainy day, and fortunately in this shot the rain subsided enough to get these really great, like, beautiful ripples in the water, but it was still very blue out there. And so adding this bit of color helps it look like a very beautiful soft magenta sunset, and that adds a really nice element. Next up is adding a bit of a vignette to draw the eye in towards the house. Again, like I talked about with the bathtub, we want to darken these areas with the foreground so that the eye doesn't stop there, but that it travels into the image. And what's nice about this is that these little light trails all help to draw the eye into the image. And so a lot of American viewers tend to look from the right to the left and top to bottom. And so in here, you would come down here and you would start to see the house. And if your eye happened to wander down, it would wander back up to the house because of these leading lines. So there was adding a little more darkness to the front of the image to further eliminate that light down there. And then a little bit more curves to bring it up, because it's starting to get too dark. And I wanted it to look a little bit earlier in the evening. I wasn't able to get out there to shoot the house at the time that I wanted, again because it was raining too hard right then. But ideally, this is the look that I was going for, and made it work. And so here we are with this finished image. We've got a little bit of wasted space here, and so I ended up going with a 16:9 crop, which helps to give it a very cinematic look. And so here is the image with that beautiful 16:9 crop. So that was the last of the complicated images that I made for the first day at Splintercreek. I shot a couple of other images during the day, some in the morning when I was first taking a tour of the property, and those were much easier edits because they weren't compiled of tons of different frames. It was usually just one frame with some pretty simple edits on it. I'm going to show you a couple of those now. The first one that we've got here is the boathouse, and we've got one of those little birds that the owners are telling me that tons of these birds were nesting in the top of the house and making them crazy, but I didn't realize that one of them was in the frame. I think maybe I'll leave it. Kind of tells the story. Reminds me of that little tidbit. And next up was, so these were taken from the little skiff. The groundskeeper took me out on the boat and to show me around the property earlier in the day. This is the model home from the lake, and again you can see there that they had just finished cutting the grass, and so that again required replacing the grass, and here it is using that same grass from the reservoir. And then we've got the shot from much further away, and this one, fortunately, there was enough grass of this longer grass out here on the sides of the house and the hill over here. And it's far enough away that it's okay if that loses a little bit of detail. And so I was able to just copy some of that grass and fill in all of these extra little bits there. That way the grass matches the landscape a little bit more. And next up was just a simple shot of this little boat keeping area, another shot of the boathouse. And these I did just really simple adjustments on. It was just, you know, changing the exposure, changing some of the colors, and straightening up lines. Nothing really crazy and involved like the other images are. They had asked me for some images of the grounds, and I also got this image so that I could add this sky to my sky library, because sometimes an image will be kind of bland, and it needs something special to give it a little more texture and drama, and adding in a sky with a bunch of fluffy clouds is a good thing. And so how do I do that? Well, whenever I see a nice sky, I'll take a photo, and then I can add that to the archive for whenever I need. But the nice thing about this one is that it kind of helps to tell the story of Splintercreek, in that it's, you know, you can see one house and trees and a lake and this huge open sky. And it's so much different than being in New York City. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And similar story with this other image. And so those are all the images that I made at day one of Splintercreek. So look forward to the next part of this, where we edit all the images from day two. So thanks for watching, and hope you enjoy the images.